Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives. This is José Barzola. Peacebuilding Initiatives is a space where we explore collaborative paths to nurture healthy, positive relationships through dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and the courageous work of shifting our own perspectives. Thank you for joining us today. In today's episode, we are diving into a timely and critical conversation titled Democracies Burdened by Toxic Disagreements, Leadership and the Republic. Around the world, and especially in democratic societies, we're witnessing a troubling rise in polarization. The kind of disagreement that once fueled vibrant debate and innovation now often hardens into division, mistrust, and even dehumanization. We're joined again by Dr. Jude Antonyappan, whose multidisciplinary work across law, social work, and education helps illuminate a crucial truth. Justice is not merely a legal or institutional concept, it's relational, it's connective, it's human. It lives in our ability to hear each other, to remain open, and to choose connection over control. So as we begin, I invite you to bring not only your thoughts, but your full presence. Let this be a conversation, not just of ideas, but of deep listening and shared responsibility. Dr. Antonyappan, thank you for being here. So we'll get started with this. When you think about the state of democratic discourse today and what most concerns you and what gives you hope, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jose, for the introduction, and thank you for continuing to do the service for the community, because it is the kind of a discourse that we ought to be having at many different levels, and unfortunately we are not. And so what concerns me most is the erosion of public trust in the leadership, as well as public trust in the concept of democracy. And we are, speaking of United States, we used to be a full-fledged democracy. Now we are almost a struggling democracy. Well, at least that's the score that has been given by the Economics Intelligence Unit that assesses or gives a democracy score based on the democracy index. They use 5 categories. And anyone can look at the web and search the web and find the 5 categories. But some of the reasons why we have been in this particular category, the scaling is from 0 to 10, and we have a score of 7.85. And nations need to have a score of 8 or more in order to be considered a full democracy. And we have been in the States since 2016, primarily because of the topic of our discussion today, which is, toxic conversations and reduction in civic public space and polarized environments and leaders who propagate misinformation, disinformation, and for their own advantage for political purposes. So this erosion of democratic values where people decide the laws under which they're going to live, and people elect their representatives to act in their best interest, in the public interest, is dwindling to such an extent that people are beginning to feel that they no longer have a conceptual understanding, or they no longer have a grasp on the democratic values, for foundational principles of liberty, equality, and the principal freedoms given to them. So that is extremely disconcerting, because in the level of toxicity in the conversations seems to be increasing as opposed to seeing a reduction in it, because our elected officials are public servants. Clearly, they are public servants. They get a salary from the hard-earned tax dollars of people like you and me, and many workers who work 2 or 3 jobs and continue to pay various forms of taxes, both progressive and regressive. So they are public servants, yet they are acting as if they are private monopolies that have to increase, most of them, not all of them, increase their economic advantage, social image, and their control, and as if they have no sense of accountability to the public. And we are private citizens, they are public servants. That is a foundational understanding of the principle of democracy, and where there is pluralistic conceptions, where people's rights are valued, where people elect their representatives just as we do in our republic form of democracy, and those elected representatives are accountable to the people to act in the best interest of all the people, not just the people whom they like, and they do not have the prerogative or the privilege to take people to task just because they think people are not those people whom they perceive to be not in agreement with their personal agenda. Those are all problematic instances. And this is creating in our country this distrust between Republicans and Democrats, which are the two clearly identifiable parties, to such an extent that now the government, United States government, is posting messages on United States institutions, public institutions website, giving almost a false narrative of the shutdown, the government shutdown that we are experiencing, and also to punish the members of the party who may or may not have voted for current party leaders in ways that affect the people's livelihoods. I mean, 750,000 workers are going to be furloughed, or some of them are not going to be paid, and there's such ambiguous messages coming from the greatest democracy it should be in the world, that was a shining light for the rest of the world. So these are all extremely disconcerting. And not only that, among people, there is a sense of distrust and there is a sense of pain that both Democrats and Republicans are going through. And we have lost the capacity to persuade each other on the importance of solutions that we consider as vital for solving our problems, for resolving our issues. Those are the things that we need to be paying attention. And as I was preparing for this dialogue, Jose, knowing that you're well aware person with integrity and integrative understanding and the importance of social intelligence and emotional intelligence, I was also realizing that our schools actually do not do a good job of acting with emotional intelligence, acting with social intelligence, and to be able to engage in dialogue with active listening, with respect for the other person's viewpoint, no matter how diametrically opposed it could be from us. That is the foundational principle of critical thinking. So I'm hoping our dialogue would help people, find common ground, come together, and heal. I think our country is in desperate need for healing and also belonging, that we all belong here. There are people like, oh no, so and so is leaving, they're going to some place, and nobody has to leave anywhere. We have sufficient resource, sufficient space, sufficient understanding to nurture each other, to support each other, to help each other belong. We are a nation of immigrants who made this nation as prosperous and wealthy, and set an example for so many peace initiatives, human rights framework. And I can just go on and on about the beauty of United States and how it is being eroded by those who are sacrificing the country for their own personal agendas.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for kind of laying the stage of where we are. And I wonder if you might go a little bit into the other part of my two-part question was, is there anything that gives you hope with, you know,
Oh, absolutely. I am an eternal optimist, and it is the person who received Bunch, who was the first African American to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 1950, because he brought about an armistice during the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he also later worked on civil rights movement. And he said during the process of bringing about that peace process in the 1948 to 1949, and he said that he has a bias of being in favor of both the Arabs and the Jewish people. And he wants the best for both of them because he believes, I'm paraphrasing, that they're both capable of best interest of each other. So he elevated the conflict to a level of peace process where each party is looking to the best of the other. And I think I also see that people are getting disenchanted with being divided and conquered, and so many different ways, that there is almost a quest for bringing people together, and there is a thirst for unity. And someone who used to belong to in this extreme right the other day came and said that this is not who we are. After the Chicago, by the ICE raid in Chicago, where they sort of came down from Black Hawk helicopters onto the roof of buildings and removed children and zip-tied children and all of that. It's all public knowledge. And he said, "This is not who we are. Come on, stop it." And this has gone far beyond our expectations of what it is going to be when you enforce immigration laws. Of course, everyone wants a sensible immigration policy. No one wants unchecked policies of immigration. But at the same time, our foundational principles of humanitarian considerations, human rights framework. And so I see, people now beginning to listen to Pope Leo, who asked the question, oh, how can you say you're pro-life when you want to, treat with those who have no place to go, those who are escaping, violent circumstances in their life and seeking refuge. You subject those who are seeking refuge, I'm again paraphrasing, to unlimited, unexpected suffering and cruelty. Is that pro-life? So he's asking us to actually engage in critical thinking, which is the basic phenomenon that you and I know we teach in our undergraduate, most preliminary class in colleges. If you want to be able to understand this enlightenment, understand this enlightenment that knowledge can bring, you need to be able to engage in critical thinking, not based on what your limited experience tells you, but to be able to juxtapose situations and historical trajectories and evaluate what is given currently in front of you, and come to a conclusion based on recent thoughtful analysis that is in the best interest of all parties concerned, right? So I see hope in that regard, because people are tired of it. People want human dignity back in life. People want civic space to be one of integrity, one of right kind of information, one of healing people. And as part of UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, there were civil society groups coming together to discuss how do we protect civic space? How do we engage in coalition building? How do we engage in preventing, subjecting people who are fighting for the welfare of everyone to unnecessary struggles and unnecessary, punitive approaches, especially those regimes that like, taking people to task for frivolous lawsuits. And so in that context, there is an emerging movement for people-based justice and increasing access to justice for people, and everywhere, even in well-developed countries. And 5 presidents, including the presidents of Spain and Brazil, came together, initiate this very robust democratic movement, democracy being the foundational principle of that. And with understanding that we need to bring hope, we need to bring people the value-based democracy, where people know they are the most important construct, but they are the most important part of democracy. Their rights need to be respected. So Brazil's, Silva and Pedro Sanchez from Spain's president, and 3 other countries, Colombia and I believe Chile and one other. And I'm not saying those countries are not going through trouble. They also have some, but every country has problems. And in every country, there are people who want to increase their wealth. There are, individuals who have real problems in their lives, but somehow come to power and then want to take the whole country for themselves and country's resources for themselves and for their families. And they will always create trouble. And so, but the hope is that there are those who see the pitfall of that kind of approach, giving autocrats a chance at ruling. It could be the most devastating thing for countries to do. So they're coming together to protect people in their own countries and elsewhere also. And so that is hope. And there are, thought leaders. I don't like to use the word thought leader so much because there are so many thought leaders coming up, but there are leaders from every sector, scientists, university leaders, university faculty, presidents, and administrators of the agencies who resign because they don't want to go along with the unethical practices of the regimes that they have to serve and so on. So those are all hopes. I am an eternal optimist. As I said, I love hope, cherish hope, and I think United States is much bigger than characters that pass through it. This will continue to be once again a shining light and a full-fledged democracy like Sweden and Norway. Norway has the highest democracy index score, about 9.75 or 85, something like that. And that shows people, Norway and Denmark has a high score, Sweden has a high score. They're all considered as full-fledged democracy. Switzerland has, of the 24 countries, and they have generous policies and to their people and to reduce economic disparities and to give value to human rights and all of those factors. I mean, I agree they are relatively small nations compared to United States, but we were getting there in terms of enhancing rights to people, and now we are reducing all those programs that were put in place by previous administrations to help Americans reach the American dream. But nevertheless, there is reason for hope.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you also for not only, looking at hope, not only from just the way the energy that you put out into the world, which I think is so essential, because that's really where it starts with you yourself. So for folks listening, um, I know sometimes some of us are more internal optimists as opposed to not. And so, um, yeah, just never losing that hope, I think, is so essential, especially because I think, uh, we're always modeling, folks are observing, and um, you also talked about a little bit about history and what's currently happening across the world, and I know that's tough to kind of stomach sometimes because we don't get the full scope of everything that's happening across the world, and that's okay. I mean, no one's expected to like know everything, and many times it's also you have to rely on different pathways. So maybe like, oh, maybe you want to read the BBC News uh, or maybe Latin American news. Like there's a whole bunch of them. You kind of need to go to the source of those countries, and even within that, sometimes you need to like, if you have colleagues or friends within that, you'll get to learn a little deeper what's not being covered. So, and
Yeah.
that's where you find those stories of hope, those inspirational stories to kind of give you some a light, a
Yeah.
guidance during these challenging times. And I mean, one of the biggest things I see is with the polarization, there's just a loss of trust that's
Mhm.
being nurtured, unfortunately, or perpetuated. And along with that, we have just in trying to rebuild that, how do we um I guess there's this toxic leadership, disagreements, integrity, impact. You kind of talked a little bit about, you didn't mention it, but I started thinking about like that moral dilemma, the ethics of it all. You know, I always kind of share with folks like if you're reading something or you're listening to something or watching something and you're like, look, once more, going back to yourself, what is your own moral dilemma or ethical light as you're like, that doesn't sit right with me. Maybe even if it's coming from, high leadership, then maybe it's not right.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, it's tough because, we want to look toward leadership for guidance, but sometimes the leadership that's there is not the right kind
Mhm.
to provide that
I
guidance. And so
see, I see
sometimes,
you hesitate to choose your
well,
words very
well,
carefully.
yeah,
That's
well,
precisely the point. The point is we are being made to feel afraid of how we phrase it and what we
culture of
say.
fear. Yeah,
Culture of fear,
yeah,
exactly. So democracy has its own culture. That culture, the epitome of that culture is freedom of expression.
yeah.
Our First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to assemble peacefully and petition the government to address grievances, whether it's at at this local level, at the state level, at the federal level. People have the right, and now people are beginning to feel afraid of what they have to say. And there have been historical precedents, I mean, in our country, I mean, during the Vietnam or before, during the Nixon era and all that. But without going into detail, the human family, I like to use the word human family because we are all family, one family, human family, and one family of this planet, including our animals and plants and all. We are all connected. So the human family, is they're sort of designed to progressively move forward, not tarry backward, right? And so some of those who want to take us backwards in propagating false theories and propagating defunct theories, which is essentially what Hitler did. And that was possible because of the socioeconomic conditions that prevailed, when Hitler came to the forefront. And he step by step made it possible for people to trust in him wholeheartedly and revoke the privileges and rights of people as human beings of one family. And that's what autocrats do. There are, examples, several examples of autocratic regime doing that. In Rwanda, for instance, the Tutsis and the Hutus, and the Tutsis were consistently, scapegoated for all the troubles, and the Hutus leaders told them to, especially elected leaders, when they assumed power, that they had a free hand on going on this genocidal spree. And so, when people are struggling to find answers to their socioeconomic dilemmas, and when someone comes and scapegoats another community or the other communities, and then takes away their right to question, takes away their right to, express freely their ideas, and prevents dialogue, that is constructive dialogue between opposing groups, then we have the recipe for autocrats to take everything that they want and destroy the society. And in the end, they destroy themselves. There has not been a single autocratic regime that provided anything good for the people. They destroy themselves. Hitler and his, fellow Nazis took their own lives in a bunker. And they say some of them went to Argentina. Well, we don't. Some did. We have some evidence, and like Eichmann, but others didn't. And so we don't have any solid evidence. But we did bring about the trials of those engaged in those atrocities at the behest of United States, played a significant role in that process because of our dedication to human rights, because of our dedication to preventing those kind of atrocities, those kind of unthinkable human tragedies. And so, people's memories seem to fade, and the new generation, younger generation, is not fully educated about the atrocities of the past and how people from different ethnic groups and predominantly members of Jewish community were destroyed in unthinkable fashion in the Holocaust. 6 million members of the Jewish community were murdered, their belongings stolen, their homes occupied by those who didn't work for them, didn't earn them. So all those devastations. And it happened to members of Japanese community here when they were interned. Again, scapegoating, false narrative, false dialogue, and destructive, absence of dialogue. So when that happens, it becomes very difficult to build trust because the foundations of trust are being destroyed. And so then we need leaders who are capable of persuading. Martin Luther, Reverend King, was a great leader of persuasion because he went to the core of what causes this distrust. Whom are they listening to? What is the counter narrative to that? And can we have, if they call us as violent, then because they called those who were against civil rights, called those who were asking for civil rights as being violent. So Reverend King said, let's have love as the focus of our justice framework. Let's follow Gandhi's nonviolence as the principal focus. And nonviolence is not weak. It requires tremendous amount of strength to be nonviolent when blows are falling on you, to say, I have a stronger faith, I have an integrity that to go, protect that, establish guardrails for the future of my children. So my children will live in a free world. That kind of passion, that kind of conviction is a requirement for persuasion of those who are blinded by, or unthought out or unreasoned, prejudice and bias. So human beings, fundamentally, we are empathetic, kind, generous, noble beings. So when situations are presented where they are reminded of this fact that you are capable of empathy, you are capable of trust, whatever nonsense that has been fed to you can be, unfed, and it could be thrown out when you are presented with facts, when you're presented with, stories of real stories of people who are with you in this, struggle for justice or struggle for, being free of conflict. I'm not saying conflict free society is the ultimate goal. Every society will have some kind of conflict sometime or the other, but we need to have the capacity to trust and capacity to persuade each other and capacity to have the right kind of understanding so that we can live peacefully. After all, how long are we going to be here? Even a most, person with the longest life expectancy may live up to 100, years, with a productive life. And we ought to be able to help each other cherish every moment of this life, right? So that's where our public dialogue has to be. That's where we need to listen to each other. That's why people have to tell leaders, we do not want your toxicity. Take it and go elsewhere. We do not want us to disrespect members whom we have elected and sent to the Congress. They are our legislative body. Even if some of them have forgotten their duty to us, we rely on those who are protecting our older person's rights to health, right to food, our children's right to nutrition, our children's right to live in a poverty-less society. We want to support all those goals. We want to elect members of Congress, our legislative bodies who are with the people for the rights of the people, for helping people achieve that American dream, not to destroy the lives of the people so they can hoard all that is for the people to have, but not for them to have. Those kind of understanding can come about only when we heal and trust each other. People need to trust each other across the aisle and forgetting our differences based on this one factor, political party, and of course now in the ethnic group identities that come in there, and then making mountains out of issues that should not be issues to begin with. So we ought to be capable of cultivating active listening, and the goodness behind all of us. I believe we are all fundamentally good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, it is, you speak to this culture of fear initially. And yeah, I mean, it's something that it's ever ongoing. It's always been there, but I feel like there's like a larger spotlight on it nowadays. Uh, and there is, yeah, I was like reflecting upon the words that I choose to use, understanding that this is a recorded context and this would be listened by who knows who. So I think part of it's not so much restraining my freedom of speech, but also I'm trying to weave, I'm trying to connect, I'm trying to reach folks, not because they're on one side of the party or the other, really just with the simple intent of like understanding the power of dialogue and why we need to kind of come together. Perspective shifting that I always share at the beginning of this. I think one of the biggest things that resonates also for me is um, kind of needing to begin to shift from the mindset of like winning. uh
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes in presentations that I give this example to folks about like, well, are we trying to figure out when there's a conflict who's right, like the ego, because then we're having an argument then. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way to like have a dialogue around like
Yeah.
who's right, or are we trying to figure out what's right for everyone collectively. um and I don't mean just like everyone in the neighborhood, in the community, in this nation. It could be everyone, every human being on this,
Mm-hmm.
every living being on this world. What's the right thing to do? Then maybe we can have a conversation, we can have a dialogue about that. So kind of just shifting your mindset into like, you know, we're not going to make that kind of goes back to that moral dilemma, the ethics of it all. Like, that we are all inclusive of every living being. We have to take into consideration, oh, wait, how did this impact our environment? Like the forests, the water,
Mm-hmm.
the fish, the animals, like, so, because when they talk about us being connected, and it's not just every human being, but every living being on this world is interconnected. And in a way, it's kind of set up where we are intended to be relying upon each other. Like, simple example of like, we breathe out carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
We need plants to
Yeah.
change that into oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're in trouble. So it's not as though we can, but there is that the ego, the selfishness of, well, maybe we consider ourselves to be higher beings in a way. And that just gets into the complexities of like,
Mm-hmm.
decided by who? By
Yeah.
us? Like, and so you can see that also, you talked about the history books, and which is ever so important to definitely know history, but also being conscientious that history is normally written by those that survive it, those that have
Mm-hmm.
colonized it. Um, and there are those brief stories that come out from time to time. But yeah, and then so much of history is being rewritten right now. I mean, right in the museums, like what will our future generations know? But anyway, shifting a little bit to a question though, just kind of wanted to share that. So maybe going back to shifting our mindset of winning arguments to one of understanding across divides. How do you suggest we go about doing that? And what role does cross cultural understanding play in transforming disagreement into dialogue? So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, where do we start? That is the question now. Because we used to have organic communities before where people relied on each other and the neighbors knew each other. They had block parties and children played outside. I mean, I'm not, trying to create a sense of nostalgia for it because even then we had problems, But at the same time, our level of trust in each other has reduced considerably. And because of that, and because of what you just shared, Jose, because of this interdependence, valuation of interdependence has been coming down because of this focus on winning. Winning is everything. And how do you define winning? If I earned enough, like a single mom, let's say, because I used to use this case, who had two children, and she had good relationship with her in-laws. So, because they found fault with their son for, getting into an affair and divorcing her and all that. So they gave her a reliable Toyota van for her to drive to take the children to school. And then she was a school photographer. It's a published case, so I can, share that many, many years ago. So she would, have a neighbor watch her children on those days when she had to go to travel to schools a little further from where she lived. And so to make sure that they're fed and they go to school. And the children went to a private school that belonged to her place of worship. So that school provided some support system. And so they never bought new clothes. They always went to a thrift store. And she was able to buy, good clothes for children and toys. And they would have a family conversation before they went shopping, where she would tell the children, today we don't have money for ice cream. We don't have money for dessert. And so the children wouldn't even go near the ice cream aisle. And her ex-husband's parents provided some support system. And when the school is not in session, when she didn't have the school photographer job because it was seasonal, she worked in a nursery, and she made some money. And during weekends, she would take the children. They had a river in their little town, and they would go and they watch airplanes, and they would, try to catch fish. And she was saying the bottom line was to be fully dedicated to children with a support system, and a community that is supportive. One can live without much focus on money being the central goal. She said she could have gone to college and, or she could have, tried to get a good, better paying job, but she wouldn't be able to spend that time with her children. She would not be able to be home when they came home. And all of those factors, to her, she said they are extremely important. Now, if you say this to a Republican, they would say, absolutely, moms need to stay at home with their children. And, some men would say, yeah, it's time. During one of the, rally last time, in one of the political rally, a man said, the job of a woman is to stay home and make sandwiches. And so there were many men cheering into that kind of. So this kind of reductionistic conversation can come from this beautiful story, which is not a story, which is a real case of a real family that was published in a magazine or a newspaper or something many years ago. I forget, maybe 25 or even 30 years ago. So this is an instance where people can look at the same occurrence and make different conclusions. A Democrat, someone who understands, social policies might say, well, think about what all this mother could achieve if they had a school program, school lunch program, now which we are eliminating. They had an accurate description of history, which now, as you said, we are eliminating. The Department of Defense has eliminated 566 books that talked about racism and the historical trajectories of our country and anything to do with gender and women's right to get voting rights and all of that from libraries and educational institutions that have anything to do with the Department of Defense. And the Department of Education has its own agenda of completely, devolving our educational progress in so many ways. But at the same time, I am open to that. I want to wait and see what can the Secretary of current Department of U.S. Department of Education enlighten the people with in what they are trying to do by cutting funds for this, that, and by, threatening universities, by fining universities. Columbia paid $200 million already, and they want UCLA to pay up to $1 billion. I mean, are they kidding? Well, these are institutions that have been serving communities, public universities. And Columbia may have the money, but Harvard may have the money because of their endowment. Even they are, everywhere it's a struggle for higher institutions of higher education. I'm not saying institutions of higher education are all perfect. I think that we have reached a limit where we need to revisit how we deliver curriculum, how we work with public-private partnerships, how we focus on meaningful career-focused educational goals, along with giving this broad enlightenment-based approach to looking at our society and compassion and liberty and freedom-based dialogue and critical thinking. All of that is important. But when we reduce human beings to winning objects, someone won and someone lost. That is not win-lose proposition is not what human beings are about. We are not even hardwired to think that way. We are creative beings. We love to create. That's why human beings love to play, because play is all about creation. Our children naturally play. Nobody has to teach them how to play. They love to play. They love to create. The school system, by all this punishment, punitive approach, and valuing one group of children over the other, put all this inferiority complex and superiority complex and extroverts and introverts. And naturally, if we are educated to be the best version of ourselves, to self-actualize, whatever it is, our, talents, our capacities, then we will have a society where being is the goal. Just being, actualizing is the goal, not winning, not losing. Someone gets $2 billion, one of the political figures, from a regime that is repressive, that has, engaged in atrocious practices against freedom of expression, against journalists. And a political figure gets $2 billion for some business proposition from that regime. Is that winning? Absolutely not. How is he going to explain that to people who believe in public trust? That people who come to power want to work for the well-being of all the people, not for the narrow clannish interest. That's what, ignorant societies, small group-minded societies used to engage in, and they end up, as in the process, destroyed everyone, themselves and others. So we need to be able to teach our children that is not the model that we want to emulate. We want to emulate. Like, for instance, when I started, it's how do we bring about that socialization process where we teach our children? You go to the losing team. My older son, was the most valued player for his school team. It's a small private school, and in his division and for basketball. So I said, every time you lose, when they have teams, go to the opposing team, shake their hands and say, with real recognition that they played well, because nobody plays poorly. No one plays to lose. Everybody is playing their best. And sometimes they make mistakes. So that kind of appreciation for humanity has to come about. So it's all about, Jose, and I think you would understand this more than because of your passion for conflict resolution. It's all about how we view our fellow human beings. If you view them as capable of being cherished, being celebrated, as capable of achieving, then we would recognize them as being, inherently valuable, irrespective of whether they win or lose, right? And that kind of, like when someone who comes to power, even with a few points, less than 1 percentage points winning, keeps, propagating the nonsense. Or people elected me, so what do you want? I mean, no. Less than half the eligible voters elected you. So therefore, behave accordingly and be the leader of all the people. I'm saying it's legislative leaders, judicial leaders, executive leaders, everyone. Be a leader for all the people, because no one has the right to occupy, people's homes, whether it's the Congress or the White House or the courthouses, with the understanding that they are there in their own right. No, you're there representing people, and behave accordingly. And we are all, serving the greater good of humanity. So who is going to tell that when someone surrounds themselves with sycophants who don't have a capacity to articulate that? Then evil just flourishes. Then lawlessness flourishes. Rule of law is thrown out the window. For average Americans who are struggling, not knowing where food is going to come from to feed their children, there are families like that. And but we used to have, real problem. I mean, real resources for the problem of homelessness. And just yesterday, the federal government, or yesterday, a few days before, announced that they are reducing millions of dollars from the programs that are set aside for helping homeless population find permanent housing. And it affects almost all the states. It affects the state of California tremendously. Los Angeles has a big homeless population because it's a city that attracts people, who have dreams, and then not everyone's dreams get acknowledged. And veteran population is in California tremendously, and many of them fought for our countries, and because of PTSD and severe struggles, they are unable to get out of their substance abuse problems, and then they become homeless. No one wants to be unhoused. and everyone wants a shelter. But as a humanistic society, the richest country in the world cannot even produce enough resources to continue the path of providing permanent housing solutions to the unhoused population. That is something fundamentally wrong with the administration. That cuts funds from the most vulnerable population. And there is something wrong, and people have to call that out. And if sycophants don't call that out and say, no, no, give highest tax increase to billionaires who have so much money, they don't know what to do with it other than to entertain, foolish, preoccupations, then not to fight for the needs of the people who elected them, then there is something problematic with that system. And it is like, time for people to be coming together, educated about real issues, not the issues of fanning the egos of fragile egos of people who rely on people being given misinformation and people being given nonsensical scapegoating of already vulnerable populations, minorities and, the single parent households and women and veterans and unhoused and children. Children get impacted because they don't have the capacity to vote. Others have to advocate for them. So
Thank
this is
you.
the culture that we ought to be,
Yeah,
changing. Yeah, this
yeah.
reactive culture, and we want a
I,
proactive
I,
culture for
I
peace
think,
and prosperity.
yeah,
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
think it,
Yeah.
no, no, I just want to jump in. I think it would be important to separate because something that kind of stuck out to me was like you mentioned sycophants. So I'm I'm assuming that is not in reference to the general public. That's probably more
No,
in
no, no,
reference
not at all.
to the media that or those not in the media that continue to support the decisions that are being made and perpetuated just so that leadership is not feelings don't get hurt basically, to say the least. And so but
Yes,
yeah,
Jose, that's
it
exactly,
is,
yeah,
yeah, I just
yeah,
wanted to kind of clarify that. I
yeah,
didn't want folks to
absolutely,
think,
yeah, not the
because
people,
yeah,
yeah,
no, because I think I
yeah,
mean, obviously everyone's a person,
yeah,
but I just want to kind of clarify that there
yeah.
is there's folks who like voted because I think, ever since the election, my mind has always been like, what is the perspective? What, that brought us to here? And so trying to understand, and I think part of it comes down to like, there's always going to be groups that feel as though they're not being heard. Maybe ethnically or culturally, we may, there's different division portions of this nation, but I do find that there's folks that whatever the leadership has been, in the past for the U.S., uh, or decisions being made, there's always going to be a group that feels excluded, or groups of folks that are feeling excluded, that feel as though their voice, their morals, what they've been raised on, are not being heard. And so it's one of those like, you don't need to answer this question, but one of those ongoing questions of mine of like, how I don't think there can be this one all inclusive being that can, you know, reach everybody, because we have some folks that everyone has different priorities. Some folks think maybe, oh, freedom of speech is a priority. I think collectively, I like to think actually everyone agrees with that, from the non, when they say people, I say like the community, not folks in power. Because I think that's just something that I learned over the past few weeks with, like, the cancellation, or the pause of a certain late night speaker, and then bringing back folks from both sides of the the aisle were speaking. But some folks prioritize like, oh, education is more important. Oh no, ability to own weapons is more important. And so where do we find that common ground? And I guess in my mind, we look toward the folks that we elect in leadership that work in Washington, D.C., or work in government across the states, to hopefully work toward finding that common ground. We aspire, maybe we have this like false, aspirations that they are exploring dialogue to find not only common ground, but ways that they can serve their constituents. And I just don't see it happening. I mean, as
Yeah,
it is, we're talking about like the government shutdown. I keep
mm,
hearing that there's people being forced to go to work, TSA agents, the folks in the towers, in like the what is it, the flight the towers, like when the
mm.
airplanes,
The
I forget.
control. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not getting paid. They're just expected to show up to work. But then those that can make decisions toward getting moving forward are still getting paid.
Yeah.
So basically, they have a paid vacation, is what I'm
Yeah, exactly.
interpreting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just so backward in so many different ways. And so, but yeah, so yeah, the dialogue. So getting back to, the tools and the practice. What practices or tools you think can communities, now we're going to shift a little bit to the communities, adopt to build a culture of dialogue and repair rather than reactivity? You talked about the reaction, and that's part of human nature. I feel like we just react so quickly to things, and that's okay. Like, we have emotions, we're human beings. Sometimes I share, like, in my talks, I'm like, oh, I know it's really tough, but if we can take a pause, if the emotions are really high, take a walk and then be able to come back to it. But I wonder if you have other, practices or tools that communities can adopt to kind of nurture this culture of dialogue and try to repair that
Absolutely. Yeah.
trust.
Yeah. And I'm so glad, I listened very carefully to what you said. And then some of the keywords are, how do you uh, change the perspective around certain cultural perceptions. Like, for instance, the whole issue of transgenderism, the transgender issue is made to become built up by certain politicians to divide the communities. And, as if, and so there are those who see that as an issue, want to then, completely denigrate members of the transgender community and completely devalue their right to exist. And then they galvanize around that issue. Another issue you brought out, which is the ownership, gun ownership. Let's ask the question. What are foundational needs of a human being? If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need food, we need, a place, safety, and we need, shelter, and we need capacity for self-actualization to be able to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves. And do they have anything to do with gun ownership and, scapegoating the transgender community? Absolutely not. But people know the next word that you used, which is where people have high emotion involvement, emotional investment, because people know that, politicians know that people can be made to feel extremely emotional if they're told they're coming to take away your guns. Then people want to immediately, those who have historically want guns and for various purposes, for hunting and as a family, my daughter's husband, my son-in-law's family in North Carolina, they go on hunting just as a very, hunting guns. They're very different. I have never seen one, but my daughter said she went with one of them. I don't like guns, and so, and she said it was really fun. Because that's their family culture, her husband's family culture. They don't do it anymore, but they used to. So people begin to feel somehow their foundational cultural aspects are being now removed by an administration that is being controlled by, in the other side, whom they like to call as the quote unquote radical left. And the Democrats like to call them the extreme right. And so, I mean, there are very few people who are concretely locked in those boxes. Most people, most Americans are moderates, peace lovers who want the best for their families, who want to be able to provide, meet those needs on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, even if they may not call them as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Every parent knows that's what they have to provide for their children: love, security, basic needs, and motivation and inspiration to grow, actualize their potentials, and to transcend their human limitations, to evolve as an ideal, peaceable, human being and continue the generations forward. And therefore, when individuals with pathological needs ascend to power and want to have this extreme greed for themselves, greed for power, greed for lusting, and greed for dividing people, and greed for wealth, and greed for just simply validating themselves, not once or twice, but billions of times they have to validate themselves as being, person of this and that and all that, even when they don't have the capacity. When that kind of pathology assumes power, then that is going to impact power everywhere else, right? Shared governance, it's going to impact. Again, I'm not laying the blame on any particular person. I'm saying societal constructions can elevate people who are unfit for leadership to leadership positions. Then, because for that to happen, society's geopolitical, international geopolitical, context, and within the intra-societies context, made themselves amenable to that to happen. And so the blame, everyone needs to share the blame for that. But having arrived there, let's take a small example, for instance, a community, a farming community. Yesterday or day before yesterday, I think CNN had a segment on soybean farmers. They've been farming hundreds of acres of soybean and selling it to, China. Traditionally, and that's their business. And because of this tariff, now they have all these soybean that has been, that is ready for harvest, and they're harvesting it. But instead of exporting it to China, they're storing them in silos. And the administration says, no, no, we'll give you the money, because the tariff money is essentially like a tax. It goes to Treasury. And so it goes to the revenue funds, general revenue, and we'll, give you, money for that. But the farmers are saying, we don't want a one-time handout. We want that market that we consistently had. We want the Chinese market for soybeans, because if that market goes away, it's very difficult to get that market back. And they are absolutely right. So many places where United States has sort of absolved its responsibility, including human rights, China is going and filling that void. I mean, China is a sovereign nation. It can do whatever it wants to do. But without blaming China, United States we have to engage in a reflective practice and ask ourselves, where did we go wrong? That within such a short time, of those practices that established ourselves as a nation of worth, value, has been now in so many different levels have lost it. And now our farmers are bearing the brunt. So many of them voted for the very same administration that is established the tariff. And so now they are saying it's not a matter of politics. All of us have to come together. Americans have to come together and to do what is in our best interest. So many poverty, in my last segment, I said poverty is 30% of rural families live in poverty. And they are the majority ethnic group, right? And I believe human family is one race, the race of human race. It's established. We have different ethnic backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, and different, other backgrounds. But ultimately, we are all humans. Every child has a right to a dignified life, to a safe life, to a loving environment. And every society should strive to make that possible. Every community should strive. Every leader should strive. A leader should ask, someone who is emerging as a leader in Hungary against Viktor Orban, who is an autocrat. And this leader says, I'm not here to ask what I can take from assuming this role. I am here to ask, what can I do for you? How can I help you? How can I bring Hungary back to a nation of prudence, a nation of reasonableness, a nation of thoughtful dignity given to every being? So that has to happen, where people come together and evaluate the cultural digressions that keep people divided, and we have to become one. In order for that, the tools are communities come together in their places of worship. Clergy have to take a stronger role, no matter what their religious background are. Teachers have to play a stronger role. Communities have to ask the questions. They have to hold their representatives accountable to their promises. And they have to, sit down with their children and explain to them to engage to be engaged in their responsibility as a member of the republic. Many eligible Americans don't even vote. And that is such a sad thing, because the rights for women to vote was accomplished with such struggle. Rights for Black community, members of the Black community, Black people were accomplished with such, it should not have been, but such a, strenuous struggle. And yet, and members of all communities, not just women or members of any particular ethnic community, do not exercise their most fundamental right as members of the republic, members of democracy. So therefore, we need to take back our role as members of this greatest democracy, as republic, and bring it back to full democracy with the highest score on those 5 categories, and not as a fledgling democracy, not as a flawed democracy. That's the term that the Democracy Index uses, a flawed democracy with a score of 7.85 on a scale of 0 to 10, whereas countries like Sweden and Norway has 9.75 or 9.85. And so, yeah. There are tools, several tools. We'd have to stop this distrust. We have to enhance. Persuasive leaders have to come forward and persuade the communities everywhere. And we have the tools. We have YouTube. We have, social media, and the toxicity of the social media has to stop, and, move away from social media that is set up to fuel hatred and anger, and go to media that do not encourage that kind of behavior. And we have to come together and belong. We all belong, and we need to heal. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place in America too. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all those different tools. And I think one of the things that really resonates is kind of going back to that freedom of speech. Um, and it is quite an honor and a privilege to be able to have that and to practice it. I mean, I think as uncomfortable or as this culture of fear exists, I'm not saying folks should like go out and like, if they don't feel comfortable, there's different levels you can go. One, and then the initial level, having those conversations within your communities, with your neighbors, with your friends, within your circles of trust. You could write letters or have visit your representatives, make phone calls, different ways to be active, for folks who beyond there's the media, there's obviously things you can say or post on social media, that kind of stuff, but I think getting beyond just a post, getting beyond having an actual conversation with someone, I think is so key. Not losing that tone. I think I've shared this before. I find that conflict happens because we're multitasking and we're reliant upon all these different platforms. Okay, we can message, we can text here. This is how I can kind of manage all these different conversations. But no, just being more intentional and taking that time to, even if it's just 30 minutes, let's devote 30 minutes one-on-one conversation. Okay, you have 3, 4 people, maybe we make it an hour, or or inviting other folks into it. And it doesn't mean that just the more people you have, the more time you'll need. Yes, it's a possibility, but I think for folks who are everyone's at a different stage. I look at it, and some folks are just want to like listen in too, because they may not feel comfortable opening up about what they have to say. But I think it's about building that brave space with folks and building that trust, and it has to start somewhere. And
Mhm.
so thank you for just reminding us, like as educators, social workers, legal advocates, like um have those conversations in the classroom. Uh, it's what more beautiful place to like spark dialogue, and hopefully, we have some community guidelines or ground rules that we all can agree upon to then continue on. That, it's not just, oh, you're bad or you're, evil. Like, it's like, well, could you explain to me why it is you have that perspective? Like, I would love to learn what perpetuated that, or how did you come to that, Because I think once we actually start talking to each other, we start realizing I said this, we have more in common with each
Yeah,
other, not just
yeah,
because we're human beings, but, there's that critical thinking aspect of it. And so thank you. Thank you. And
yeah.
thank you for showing different, parts of hope and resilience. Just to last questions here. If you were to have a vision, what would a healed democratic culture look like to you? Not perfect, but healthier and more just. I wonder what your vision for that would be.
Yeah, vision is a long term, right? I would hope that we really teach our children how to respect each other, how to engage in conversation, how to listen to other person's viewpoint, no matter how different it is than your viewpoint, and ask yourself and ask them, probe, why do you get that viewpoint? Why do you think it is that way? Like I can give you an example, like this morning, or it happened maybe yesterday, between the chief of staff, current chief of staff, Stephen Miller, and a member of our Congress, AOC. They both young, and one was AOC called Stephen Miller what he said as a 4.7-inch troll, going on about something, and he in turn called her that woman with no brain, and something like with a detached from a hand, or something. I don't even want. It was so grotesque. What he called her, and what she how she characterized him too. They are both unacceptable. These are members of administration. One legislative branch and another serving at the executive
Kind of
branch.
goes back, sorry, it just kind of goes back to that, like, we try to educate our youth, folks that are just growing up to like treat others as you like to be treated. And yeah,
And when you
so
demonstrate
yeah,
this in this macro level, in front of the entire nation, and it's being sort of spread in all kinds of social media, that's just one example. I mean, what the uh, top executive says about women, children, I mean, it just goes on, and others in the administration. So when we model this kind of toxic conversation as acceptable forms of communication, it is very difficult for parents to sit down with their children and say, this is toxic, but we do not like that in our family. We want to have respectful conversation with each other. And how do we do that? How do we, stop being reactive? Most importantly, how do we listen? Active listening is extremely important. Most of us are socialized to already process what we think we are going to say instead of actually listening to the conversation. Active listening in itself is healing process both for the listener and the one who is being listened to. And so we need to be able to model that in our schools. That's long term. But right now, what do we have to do? We need to understand the urgency of the situation, the urgency of current circumstances, such that if Americans don't come together and unite and say, we want our constitutional and statutory provisions to be respected in terms of our fundamental rights and in terms of our economic rights, in terms of our, how our country is being administered. And we need to be able to help each other to heal, to support. And this has to happen in our institutions of higher education. It has to happen in our schools, in our communities, in our community meetings. And we have to stop with the name calling. We have to stop with, even at the congressional committee hearing, and the highest judicial leaders, the Attorney General for the DOJ, was calling a member of the Congress as a failed lawyer. And he in turn was saying other things. I mean, these are all public demonstrations of people interacting with each other and, raising their index finger and pointing at each other and saying horribly unacceptable, personal attacks on each other in ways that undermine the legislative process, undermine the judicial process, that undermine our democracy itself. And so, in order for that to change, we need to accept the fact that constructive dialogue is possible. Constructive dialogue that is enlightening for both the parties is possible. And conflicts, any situation can be complex and ridden with conflict. That doesn't mean that we avoid conflict. We look at the conflict for what it is and find win-win solutions, but it's all about compromise. In life, we make compromises. When we don't have ice cream, and when you say, okay, I have to go to the store and get ice cream, and your children say, it's okay, Mama, you don't have to go, we can have something else. And children understand the importance of, compromises, and they are, well, you raise them to be empathetic, if you raise them to be considerate, then they're capable of understanding so many things as children, as, as peers in their schools, and as, workers in their offices, and as community members by way of civic engagement. We have, duty as members of a democratic republic, and we need to be able to cherish that and support each other in every way possible. It's easier said than done under the current climate, but they are not just pretty words. They are real, actionable, insights that if we put our mind and if our leaders are committed to that, it's possible to do that. We have done that before. We have gone through tremendous civil strife during civil rights movement, or well before that during civil war, and we established our values and principles from that as a constructive society, and the most prosperous society, and welcoming of refugees and immigrants, and building on each other's strength. And when I first went to New York, and I thought, my gosh, yes, the United Nations headquarters is there, but also this is United Nations. These are people in Times Square. You see people from all over the world, food from all over the world, languages, so many languages being spoken. And I was like, and there's a beautiful river. And then at that time, I hadn't gone to Statue of Liberty, to the island itself, but I saw the statue, and, with the torch, a woman holding the torch of liberty, and for all the people, it was just too good to be true. I didn't understand all the underlying, tensions and all that. But those tensions were minimal, but now they are out in the open. And we can take a hard look at it and say, how do we heal from here? How do we go from here? We can do it and come together. Let's do it for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandchildren. Let us protect our nation, and for the sake of children everywhere. I mean, we have withdrawn ourselves from so many important, organizations, and we were the backbone of United Nations, founders of United Nations. And so, and now, so many good work. I'm not saying United Nations doesn't need to go through some changes. Of course, every institution, over as historically as things change, leadership changes, they have to go through changes. But that doesn't behoove us to absolve our responsibility to this collective body that is acts in the interest of well-being of all humanity. And so, how do we create that passion for in our children to do good, to live well? And to be able to, accomplish that goodness in everything that they do. And not that we won't have problems, our children will have problems, but how do you problem solve? That's what life is all about. And for greater goodness and greater happiness, every individual has the right to be happy, to live a dignified life, and to be able to have access to this earth's resources. This earth was not, it's not part of the cosmos for just a few individuals who think it's only their right to have a major share of Earth's resources. Yeah. Yep. Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I I one thing that kind of stuck to me was in the work that I do, I think that we all do, is you talked about compromise. I kind of think that's part of the problem, that we're exploring compromising as opposed to collaboration. It's not
True.
even collaboration is not even something that is even like, there's this chart on like five different conflict styles. And if we want to truly achieve something to the best, and the relationship is important, we want to collaborate. So compromise, the relationship is not that important. and and so it's, I mean, something, I don't want to say compromise is bad, but like I remember for a while people would be like, "Oh, we just need to practice tolerance," and I'd be like, "No," I'm like, that's not even like on the chart of ways to like, engage it with someone. So yeah, I think, and I sometimes wonder, like, is there something better than collaboration? But we're not there. We're not even there yet. So I do hope that folks, just for folks listening, just find ways. How best can you collaborate with folks
Yeah.
that are on opposite ends? I mean, I think part of it, just kind of what we've been talking about, starts with a conversation. So I just want to say thank you so much
If I
for,
can clarify one
yeah, yeah,
thing,
please,
Jose,
please go right ahead. Yeah,
because
go right ahead.
I also believe, you're absolutely right. Compromise is the lowest level of value, right? It has the lowest value in terms of achieving what we want to achieve. We want collaboration and collaboration for consensus, right? That is the ideal we want. We want everyone to be comfortable with the decision, but when intractable conflicts happen, as you and I know, like this, with the situation we are in now, the polarization is so strong, so extreme, and the fans of divisive tendencies are so active. It's very, very difficult to get people to see consensus. And we are at a time when you and I would have never probably thought that there would be actually a receptivity to the idea that we don't need empathy. But there are groups of people who somehow have subscribed to the idea it's okay not to have empathy, which is the most human foundational attribute. So when we have individuals who are so far out there, and I hate to use the word hate, as operating by, hate framework as opposed to love framework, how do we then meet them halfway without condemning them, saying, oh, they're this, they're ignorant, they're this, they're that? And how do we look at how did they get there? What factors got them there? Which leaders do they listen to? What are the leaders' viewpoints? Can we dissect those in ways? And even when they now understand it is detrimental to them, they still want to keep that because they would rather act in their own detriment as long as they can, going back to your concept of winning, as long as they win something, win this ideological war. So at those instances, compromise on practical problems to begin with, but with consensus as our goals, as transformative mediation. As you know, I am a great believer in transformative mediation, but with some level of facilitation, some level of directive, guidance given to those who are somewhat, propelled by fear. Fundamentally, it is the fear of being, not validated, fear of not being given equal opportunities, the fear of being ignored, fear of being constantly standing in the last part of the line instead of being up front. And so it is really problematic. I mean, as of today, 319,000 Black women have been let go, from their jobs, private and public, in the last few months. And so talk about many of them are supporting their families. So these are families, hundreds of thousands of families who have lost their principal breadwinners, a livelihood. And the level of impact on society, and especially federal workers who have been fired and who have been subjected to extreme angst, and then say, come back and work, and then say, no, you may not get paid, and then say, no, actually, you may be let go. I know someone who's actually, one of my friend's daughter who is phenomenal, worked extremely well, and single mom who has been told today to be online for 4 hours during the period of which she would be told whether she would be furloughed, whether she would be fired. This is United States government. I mean, think about it. We are an enlightened society. The Western civilization operated on the notion of enlightenment, equality, fraternity, and liberty, and freedom, and every worker's right to earn a responsible, dignified livelihood, opportunities. All of that is being either decimated or given only for certain quarters of the society based upon how that quarters of the society is perceived by the current leadership, and not to everyone. That is extremely problematic. That is not what a civilization does. I love Gandhi and Gandhian principles. My father loved him too, but one of the things Gandhi said, which I didn't like very much, someone asked him, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said, well, it's a good idea, meaning there is no Western civilization. And I thought, well, that is so, because I used to read Aristotle and Plato and, loved the paintings and and all of that, the French, Picasso and Goethe and all that. And so it's very difficult for me to understand why would you say something like that. But now the periods that we are witnessing now in the United States, where a lot of streams of Western civilization sort of confluence to create its own American, kaleidoscope, it seems like maybe there was some truth to that. I don't know. I still don't buy that. And I think there's a robust Western civilization that exists in so many different ways. But Americans are, struggling. I am struggling as an American. My children are, and we're all struggling. And so, anyway, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for being able to clarify that. Yeah.
Just for that, we were, yeah, I, no worries. I completely, um, yeah, I will say finding community during these challenging times, the, nurturing those circles, of trust, and building upon them, I think are ever so needed and so essential in today's time. So I just want to say, I want to thank you again for such a powerful insights, your grounded wisdom, your unwavering commitment to
Mhm.
people-based justice. We explored today how, toxic disagreement threatens the heart of democracy, how we all saw how courage, compassion, and conscious leadership can create new possibilities for healing and connection. Definitely in these times of division, it's easy to retreat into silence and culture of fear, and sometimes it just builds up and can escalate into outbursts and more conflict. And so it is ever so essential to find those circles of trust and have those open conversations, check in on your mental health, whether there's professionals out there, there's um sometimes it's just coping strategies, the writing, the listening to music, taking the walks, the exercise, like um so but you know continue to this is almost like an invitation or a challenge for folks to remain engaged, stay human with one another, and to remember that democracy is not just a system but a daily practice of relationships. It's the biggest thing I keep hearing. It's like this democracy of the United States is this large experiment that we're in. How many years into it now? And it's still too early to tell, a couple hundred years into it, to say that like we haven't figured out, because we're not. And that's, I think, the beauty of it. It is an experiment. But I think that also gives us the opportunity to heal from this, and that we can do better. We know we can be better. And so, yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much. Here at Peacebuilding Initiatives, we definitely believe that justice begins not in grand statements, but in small, brave acts of listening, dialogue, and transformation. So, wherever you are, we encourage folks listening to take this conversation to your communities, ask those hard questions, stay curious, and above all, lead with integrity, even when it's uncomfortable. It's the one thing we can rest assured is that there will always be change. But sometimes leaning into our discomfort, that's the opportunity to truly grow from our experiences, the routines of our lives. So thank you for joining us today. If this conversation has resonated with you, please share it with others, subscribe, stay connected. You can find more resources in upcoming episodes. Until next time, keep building peace, one conversation at a time. Thank you so much. This is
Thank
such a
you.
delight.